Wow. We've got a topic today, and I've got a really awesome guest. We're talking about all caps and email, and whether it's effective or digitally yelling. But I want to introduce you to my guest, RJ Tallier. Full disclosure, everybody, I've known RJ for many, many years in terms of running the same circles. When I was at Groupon, we used Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Exact Target back then, and RJ and I interacted. So that was like '09, right?
Long,
But
long time.
RJ, man, you've got an amazing background, many different areas. So I want to have you introduce yourself and give everybody a little bit about who you are.
Sure, sure. Thanks for having me, Andrew, and it's fun to reconnect.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm RJ Tallier. I'm the CEO and founder of a new startup called Backstroke. And as Andrew said, I worked for Exact Target starting in 2004, and I worked on the deliverability team,
Mhm.
which was my first foray into email marketing.
Mhm.
Moved into product management and then ran all the messaging products at the Salesforce Marketing Cloud over that 10-year span. I went on to lead a product team at a startup that didn't work out so well. And then I started my own startup that predicted what creative you would click on Instagram, Facebook, and Google called Pattern 89 that got acquired by Shutterstock. And worked for Shutterstock for a year. And then I've been working on this business for the last 2 years and about ready to get it up and launched. So
You talk a little bit about
yeah,
that, or is still in private beta?
sure. Yeah, yeah. So Backstroke is a generative AI platform for high impact short copy.
Hmm.
So think email subject lines, pre-headers, text messages, push messages, and landing pages. And we're really focused on the performance of that generative AI content. And over the last 2 years, I've signed up for over 10,000 different messaging programs, alongside building predictive and emotional models that help us create and fine tune all of the content for mostly for the retail segment, but we're expanding beyond that. So yeah, excited to get that up and running here
and
shortly.
that and that kind of leads into what we're going to talk about today, right? Because I mean, you're doing a lot of development
Yeah.
in this, right? And it's funny when you brought to me the content about all caps and email and yelling, right? That's the first thing we all think of, right? Like people are like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Right?
Yes.
Talk to me a little about it. Is it why are we so screamy, or what is your research,
Yeah.
right, revealed that maybe people don't know anything about?
Well, it's when I start. So my first job in email marketing was in deliverability, and it was like, do not put all caps words in there.
Right.
Certainly don't put the word free in all caps. And
Hmm.
as we've gotten this data set up and running, I've been so surprised at the amount of all caps content. And, I also have an English degree, so I'm like one of those English nerds that looks at like sentence case and title case and all the different dimensions of it. But what was really surprising is all caps in subject lines has doubled in the last year. So
Wow.
it's gone from around 5% to almost 10%. And if you look at over the last 2 years, it's Black Friday where that spike really, really goes up. And then
Yeah.
it doesn't come down. It like spikes up Black Friday of last year and then stays and then spikes up again. And so all caps, either a few words or all the words in all caps. I mean, it's becoming a way to grab attention and grab attention from consumers in the inboxes. But I think it's losing some of its luster at this point because now everybody's doing so much of it. But it's I just thought that's a no-no. Like that's a rule. You're breaking the rule. Like it's sounds like you're screaming.
Yeah.
It potentially could cause deliverability issues, although I don't think that spam filters look for the all caps anymore.
Yeah.
But there's a branding component to it as well. So anyway, I was just really surprised by that specific.
But you're talking about all caps, not only just in subject lines, but in copy as
Correct.
well.
Yeah, in the subject line, the pre-header, as well as in the email body, it's becoming more and more common to put, just to put all caps, full sentences, or all of it. And but my question is it on brand? Does it actually drive performance?
Mhm.
Those types of things. I've got
Yeah.
all sorts of other data on it, but yeah, it really has caught my attention.
It's interesting because I wonder. like how it became so popular? You said maybe it's losing its luster these days, but was it a performance spike, you think, for the brand? And then everyone started jumping on it? Because I don't know about you, we've been in the business long enough, RJ, to know that sometimes we as marketers love to jump on bandwagons, right? You
Yeah.
know, about all this kind of stuff. And I wonder how that evolved, right?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, there are about 200 kind of bellwether brands that I look at
Okay.
as trendsetters. And many of them use more and more and more all caps. And I don't have access to all of their performance data, but it must be working
Right.
as a way to draw attention away from, other subject lines and pre-headers in the inbox. And then I
Mhm.
think that people are saying, hey, now we can do that. Let's go ahead and mimic these brands who are the trendsetters
Right.
and chase after them. But what's interesting is um, if you look at luxury brands, they don't use all caps as much. They use more sentence case. So it's
Mhm.
really the discount brands and the mid brands, or like maybe the lightly expensive brands. There's actually a nice curve to that as you go from the price point up. So I wonder if we're kind of at peak caps, peak
Yeah.
screaming, and we're going to start to see lowercase and or more emojis or other things draw our attention away in the inbox. But I think it's those bellwether brands that are really driving it, and we're kind of mimicking them.
What's interesting is that obviously emojis have been around for a while, and I've seen studies on emojis and the use of emojis, and then this all caps thing coming around. I still get a lot of brands using a lot of emojis.
Yeah,
What I'm wondering is will that shift into something like the use of all caps in content, and then the ability to use color, or things to highlight those all caps to draw attention, right? Like because we scan and sometimes read and have
yeah,
this digital ADD that sort of is pervasive. So I wonder if that's sort of like the next hurdle that
yeah.
people need to jump off, or if your generative AI is tracking the use of color inside email along with content or copy in and itself.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. You'll have to have me on another time to give you some data on the color stuff.
Yeah.
But I think you're exactly right. There's,
Yeah.
color trends, and what's trending up, trending down, in addition to the all caps. The other thing is spacing. So specifically in the subject line and the pre-header, I'm
Yeah.
seeing people indent a few spaces. They're just trying to
Okay.
get any differentiation to draw your eye there. And then once you're in the actual email, the all caps as a headline and the all caps in the like the offer, coupled with some sort of GIF or some sort of colorful animation to drive you actually to the conversion. Yeah.
Interesting. And so how did you sort of find out this trend? And are there any other trends that you see sort of emerging in any of this other than just all caps?
Yeah, so I mean, there's all sorts, all sorts of stuff. The one of the things that we're tracking is emotion in subject lines, and we looked at the Plutchik wheel, which is this like that wheel that therapists use since the
Mhm.
80s that track
Mhm.
the 8 primary emotions that
Yeah.
we experience as humans, and joy, anticipation, surprise. Those are the things that are most common. But what's
Mhm.
really interesting is we're seeing a lot of marketers experiment more and more with angry subject lines and sad subject lines and like fear-based subject lines. So kind of those negative emotions. Fear
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense, like FOMO, don't miss out, like
Yeah.
you're fearful or whatever. But because Gen Z is a little different than the previous generations, those angry or sad emojis, those angry or sad subject lines are speaking to them in a way that's maybe different than like baby boomers or people who are your my age. But
Right.
again, it feels like kind of almost inappropriate in a
Mhm.
marketing way, like um like you'd want all positive or something like that. But again, we're trying to speak to a different generation that
Yeah.
acts differently than somebody like me in the
Right.
inbox. So that emotion component is one to watch.
And do you think that the use of all caps is has one emotion over the other? I mean, we talk about yelling, right? I don't necessarily think of it as angry, right? In
Yeah.
terms of caps. Um, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or have any of that sort of formal
Yeah.
training. I just look at it from will it resonate with me or is it resonating with their audience, which is why they're using it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of surprise in all
Yep.
caps, sure. Like,
Yeah.
when you're yelling surprise, the sale is extended, surprise, the
Hmm.
clearance got extended, or those types of messages. We see a lot of that in the retail space. But
Hmm.
all caps has been associated a lot with anger because
Mm.
people often say, hey, don't text people in all caps or don't put all caps in our personal emails or our professional emails. Like it's
Right.
one of the things you don't do unless you're really trying to emphasize something
Yeah.
because like when my dad emails me in all caps, it sounds like he's yelling at me, you know?
Yeah.
So I think there's an angry emotion that can be inferred through that. But it's used a lot of different ways. But um
I was scouring my inbox before this call, and I was looking to see, are there brands putting their brand names in all caps? And
oh
I found
yeah.
one or two. Uh,
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not on the right lists or stuff, but they're changing the way that their brand is positioned just in the naming in
Yeah.
itself. Have you
Yeah.
noticed that too? Or
Yes. Yeah, definitely, definitely. The thing, like thinking about this, the scroll is people are trying to do anything that they can. So
Mhm.
I was actually like laughing to myself because again, I'm like I'm 45, so like
Yep.
Usher is right in my college wheelhouse. Usher spells his name in all caps, which I know from putting him on Spotify with my kids. But yeah, I
Yeah.
am seeing a lot of brands do that. So they're doing all caps in the subject line or in like the from field. The other thing that they're doing is they're adding somebody's name, like Andrew at the company.
Yeah.
They're changing up the from name again, like just to introduce newness and intrigue into the subject line. So or into the inbox. But yes, is the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Playing with the caps. And then I actually predict that we're going to see a lot of lowercase come through. I think that as all caps becomes just this wall of text, that we're going to see the counter trend emerge that people are going to go to all lowercase. And I don't have the data just yet on that. Right now, about 2% of content has that all lowercase without any sort of caps in it. So we'll see if I'm right in a year or two.
Well, I'm old school, man. And so whenever I get an email from somebody, not just a brand, let's just call it a business email or a personal email, and they write in all lowercase and don't even capitalize the first letter, drives me freaking bananas, man. Like
Yeah,
I don't, I maybe it's just my
yeah,
upbringing of saying, you kind of have to be somewhat formalized, but like
yeah,
I've seen stuff like that. And so it'll be interesting to see if they move to all lowercase
yeah,
in the
yeah,
content in itself. And is it gonna resonate? What do
yeah,
you think what do you think marketers, people that are going to listen to this,
yeah.
what would you recommend based off of the data that you're seeing if they want to jump on this trend or start to do it? What would your advice
Yeah, well, so the it's the classic debate between brand and performance.
be? Hmm.
And I see I've got the data here that it says 25% of these messages that appear in our inboxes are sentence case, meaning the first letter of the subject line is capitalized and the rest is not.
Hmm.
24% is partial caps where like one word might be capitalized. So
Hmm.
I think my recommendation would be to challenge your brand standards and figure out what actually drives performance because variation is going to actually perform and run experiments where you're doing all caps, all lowercase, or even if that drives you crazy, Andrew. But and then do some sentence case. But I think so much time is being spent right now on adhering to brand standards
Right.
that sometimes those subject lines and that pre-header is then getting missed.
Yeah.
So it's the classic experimentation. I also think that you're going to really cheapen your brand if you're a luxury brand or even one of those more expensive brands by resorting to all caps. So you got to get clever with other dimensions like emojis and emotion.
So that's B2C. What about B2B? Is it a no to use
Uh,
any stuff in B2B, or are you tracking that too?
we're not tracking it, but I'm kind of the same as you, like old school. I think screaming in my inbox is going to feel really,
Mhm.
really awkward on the B2B side. So I would not advise to do that.
Yeah, interesting. And then there's the fringe things, right? There's the publishers, right? That are not trying to necessarily sell a pair of socks, or shoes, they're there to sell subscriptions, right? To different publications. And I think maybe that goes along the same lines that you said, right? Like it should do the brand if it's a very ultra modern men's publishing aspect, and we know that their demographics skew younger, that might actually work, but
Yeah.
I'm not so sure, right? I mean, if there's touchy subjects, it'd be interesting to do tests, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, the other kind of component here that we're watching is um most is what are people actually saying in the subject line? This is like a classic. Like, are you like telling the whole story in your subject line? Or are you creating enough intrigue to drive people into the message? And
Yeah.
so I was looking at one brand that had 40% of their messages, everything was in the subject line, and their open rates were a lot lower. And I know that there's open rate concerns, but open rates lead to click-through rates, lead to conversion. Like, got to look at all three of them to tell the full story.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where using all caps actually can emphasize parts of the story that they'll learn the rest of in the message. So that's where like maybe one capitalized word or two capitalized words can maybe not break those brand standards, but actually drive people into the message.
Right. Interesting.
Mhm.
Um, all right. So before we wrap up here, one of the things I wanted to kind of get from you is you've been in this realm for many years, just like
Yep.
I have. And we watch these emerging trends, whether it's all caps or emojis or the Yahoogle thing or all this kind of stuff come out. In terms of emerging trends that haven't been talked about, do you have any sense of what's coming next or potentially what's coming next as you sort of use your use your tools and products to predict things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the one that I'm watching is actually spacing indention. Like
Okay.
that, I think that that's an interesting one. Like, how will people? So we have about 88 characters in a desktop or 36 in a mobile view. Like, how are people going to use spacing to attract you in? I think that's
Yeah.
one. Um, the other that comes to mind is um, uh, like literary devices. So, I studied English
Yeah.
in college and in grad school, and things like it gets a little bit like into cheesiness, but like rhyme, rhythm, meter. Like we've done some analysis on like iambic pentameter in subject lines
Really?
actually performs better than not. So like because that's just the way that like we normally like the normal lilt of our conversation versus
Mm.
an awkwardly worded subject line. So that's an interesting one. Other subject line
Yeah.
techniques, like there's more like like esoteric ones that only English majors would appreciate.
Yeah.
But I think that they're with the world of generative AI kind of over optimizing so that everybody sounds similar. Um,
Mhm.
any ways that we can use literary devices or literary techniques or really human approaches that
Mhm.
stand out
Yeah.
from the crowd will make us look better. So that's what I'm tracking. I'm really interested in it, and it's funny to watch. Like, there's a literary technique called enjambment. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's
No.
when a poem you write a line and then there's a second line, and the sentence basically continues through the second line. It's called
Okay.
enjambment. Poets know what it is, and I'm seeing a lot of really clever subject lines combined with pre-headers, so
Right.
that you will both read the subject line and the pre-header because they continue into each other.
Oh, cool.
And
Okay.
like that's a like an interesting like things that like English majors and English teachers will love.
Yeah.
But it separates itself from the highly promotional best practices that everybody ends up with, which are super average.
Um, my son got me into TikTok a couple years ago, and I
Yeah.
was very anti TikTok to begin with, and then learning all these new words, right? And
Yeah.
then like people our age, using these new words that the young kids are using, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
look like jackasses, right? Like doing it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I'd be curious to know if there is going to be a rise or a spike in the word. I'll just use the only one I really kind of know is Riz, right?
Yeah.
Like, are they using that right into brands that are
Yeah,
clearly meant for
yeah,
that generation?
yeah,
Or are they using it to be funny too?
yeah,
Maybe we, as an old guy like me, is learning this stuff. I won't
yeah.
actually conversation, but it'd be really interesting to know how there's a rise in that.
So don't do it. So we literally track it on a quarterly basis. I do a consumer survey out to U.S. consumers, asking them hundreds of questions like, "Would you be interested in a message that said this? How would you rate this?"
Wow.
And the only people that say they love those messages are Gen Z.
Okay.
And I mean, the baby boomers don't even know what we're talking about
Yeah.
when you say like you have so much Riz RN or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do not put
Sleep.
that. Maybe we should edit me saying any sort of slang stuff, but
Yeah.
slang is predicted to perform really well for the Gen Z and some of the Gen Y
Mhm.
audiences. But
Mhm.
once you get up into Gen X and baby boomers, people just don't even know, and they prefer more
Mhm.
straightforward
Okay.
subject lines or things with kind of like clever wording.
Right.
So it's actually an interesting question, and one of the reasons that we're building Backstroke is because one size doesn't fit all, and one
Right.
size has never fit all,
Right.
but we often tend towards the average,
Right.
and we pick one thing. So, doing like creating a really slangy subject line that for somebody who loves TikTok, it makes a lot of sense and it will attract their attention, but the same subject line will like keep my parents from even engaging with it. So,
And for the audience, I watch a lot of dog videos on TikTok,
oh.
right? And I tend to send a lot of them to my wife, and she always tells me I've already seen this one, type of thing. So I don't get too much into it, but there's some funny content on there. All right, so let's wrap it up here, RJ. You have an audience in front of you, and based off of what you're learning, and based off of what you're seeing, what are a couple key takeaways you'd like to tell everybody?
Sure. One, all caps is a go. I mean, you can use it no matter what your brand is, you can, even if it's against your brand standard. It's not only considered yelling anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Experiment with title case, sentence case, partial case, all caps, and lowercase.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as you can segment your audience and use caps as a way to differentiate into those segments or micro segments,
Yeah.
it actually really can improve the overall performance of your messaging. So I'd leave you with those three.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that because you have the data in front of you, but I'll add on to that when we start talking about experimentation, right? Is that oftentimes brands love email or anything, and because it's an immediate return, and oftentimes they don't spend length of time testing this sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? And I've gone through 6, 12 months of testing on just a confirmation email and the use of words, long form copy, short form copy, placements, and things of that nature. Don't be afraid. My big key takeaway is if you're going to experiment with this stuff, don't be afraid to do a long tail test.
Mhm.
And it's not just a one and done sort of thing. And then keep an encyclopedia. Maybe I'm dating myself. Keep a record of what you're testing and what the results are, right? So you can pull it out and say, well, man, we tested this a year ago. Why don't we test it again to see if there's been any differences, or we tested again to, like you said, segments or even newer segments of
Yeah.
people to see if it's resonating. Great stuff, man. As always, we're going to put your details where they can get a hold of you. I'm sure that some people are going to want to take a look at the product
Cool.
when it goes live. Maybe they'll follow you on LinkedIn. But it was great to finally have one-to-one with you. It's been a while, RJ, man. You're super smart. You've got a lot of stuff, a lot of experience, and I wanted to thank you for coming on to Email Never Sleeps. And man, I hope this thing takes off. It sounds
Thanks,
pretty
Andrew.
amazing,
Thank you.
and it sounds to me like there's a lot of people that can benefit from the information you have to give, and specifically for certain brands and the specific verticals they're in. So it's been awesome. It's
Yeah.
been awesome.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. And everybody, thank you again for supporting Email Never Sleeps. As always, keep doing what you're doing, but try something a little bit differently. Try to do something iterative. We'll see you on the other side, everybody.